All right, joining me over the phone right now is Boston Red Sox Senior Vice President and General Manager Mike Hazen. Mike, Happy New Year. How you doing today?
Hey, Danny. How you doing? Good to be here.
I'm doing good. Listen, the last couple months, what's this been like for you since the official promotion in September? I mean, has it been business as usual since you've been in this organization, this Red Sox organization, since 2006, or has there been a little bit more excitement? I mean, how would you describe the last 3 months as the GM of the Red Sox?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much business as usual. Certainly, we've been through our ups and downs since 2006, a long time ago now. And a lot has happened in that time span. Obviously, a couple World Series and a few last place finishes. And when you kind of swing the pendulum like that, things happen and changes. And been here with Theo, been here with Ben, and a lot of great times with those guys. And I think we've accomplished quite a bit and hopefully put the organization from a young player perspective on a pretty good footing. Obviously, since Dave's come on a few months ago, we've made a lot of changes with regard to, some personnel moves on the player side. I think Dave has inherited a lot of people and good people in here, our scouting, player development guys that have done a lot of good work in bringing talent into the organization. And I think he's embraced that, which has been good. I think it's been good for the people in here, and we're looking to hit the ground running going into next season. And I think, like I said, with some of the changes from a player standpoint that have been made, we're excited about the team that's coming out there. And,
you made a couple huge moves so far this winter. The Craig Kimbrel deal sort of got the ball rolling. That trade, you sent 4 prospects to San Diego. Look, Mike, I'm on the record saying I love the move. I still feel that way. But these prospects that you gave up, I mean, those are kind of your guys, right? More than they were Dave Dombrowski's guys. How hesitant were you to move someone like, let's say, Emmanuel Margot, who was one of your top prospects? How hesitant were you to move someone like that, a kid like that, in that deal or in any deal at all?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Look, I think number one, no matter who was here, whether it was Ben, Theo, myself, Amiel Sade, who drafted a lot of these guys, Mike Rickard, Eddie Romero, who signed the Latin American guys, you can never get too attached to the players that are in your minor league system. We love those guys. We hope to, you always have that ideal scenario of growing a homegrown team, a completely homegrown team, but that's not realistic, and it doesn't win you World Series. Those guys definitely are a part of those World Series championship teams and begin to develop the continuity that you can have year over year. Guys like Pedroia and Uke and Bard and Ellsbury and players that we've had here, Johnny Lester, that we had here for a long time. Those guys become the foundation of those teams, but you're always going to have to add. You're always going to have to fill holes. You're always going to have to increase your talent level at the major league level. And so you're going to have to give up players when you make trades. And, I think, there were two sides to that trade. There were people that came down and said, hey, we love Craig Kimbrel. You got Craig Kimbrel. It doesn't really matter what you gave up for him. And then there are guys on the other side that said, look, that's a lot to give up for Craig Kimbrel. And, you have to balance those things in any decision that you make. I think the number one thing is, though, when we identified the guys going into the offseason that we wanted to go after, Kimbrel was one of those guys, and we went and got that guy. And, whatever you paid for that guy and within prospects or financially, I still think at the end of the day, when you're looking at your roster heading off into the season, you want to feel good about the players that you went and acquired, and he's one of those guys.
And you look at the relievers that were out there. You mentioned Kimbrel. You targeted him. You look at maybe someone like Kimbrel Chapman, who is now with the Yankees. I mean, was there ever any interest in someone like that? We know the stories. The Dodgers maybe were involved, and then there was some off-the-field stuff that came out about Chapman. But before all that, was there any interest in him early on in the offseason?
I mean, you look at every available potential player that's out there. Obviously a lot of good players out there, but we really focused in on Craig from the get-go when we had our meetings back in October, November. As a guy, Frank Wren was somebody that had known Craig from the Atlanta days and, really vouched for what he would bring to our team, what he would do in the back end. And, we went after him and we got him, thankfully, because we liked him a lot. And like I said, it was one of those guys that we identified early, and we're happy he's here.
David Price, 7 years, $217 million. I love this deal as well. You mentioned identifying early. I mean, David Price being a free agent, Mike, this seemed like a no-brainer to me. I mean, given your team's needs, was it as much of a no-brainer inside the front office with the Red Sox? Because I'm watching David Price. He goes to Toronto last year, and I'm saying to myself, look, Red Sox need to go out and get this guy this winter. Did you know, watching him down the stretch and how he dominated at the end for Toronto in the regular season, did you look at that and sort of know you were going to go hard after him and make him a priority this winter?
I don't know if anything's a no-brainer in this business because you don't know what your playing field's going to be when you go off into either free agency or trades. You don't really know what the price tag is going to ultimately become based on the market or based on what other teams are asking for in trades. Look, we've always liked David Price. We've had to watch him come in here time after time after time and battle us, and he's been on the plus side quite a few times against us. So look, we've always liked him. We've always felt like he was a top of the rotation guy and true ace. Certainly something that has eluded us over the last few years since the breakup of the last club. And we felt like that was something that we needed to put at the top of the rotation. And, we've felt like that for a while. Sometimes you have the opportunities to do those things. Sometimes you don't, depending on how the market is shifting on you and the players that are available. But, again, just like Kimbrel, he was one of those guys that we had identified early. I think from the standpoint that we felt most comfortable is, when you go through those processes of breaking down players from a talent standpoint, from a makeup standpoint, from what they look like in the clubhouse, et cetera, whenever David Price's name came up, there was very little for us to really have to go chase in terms of checking on, whether it was what he was like in a clubhouse, the type of teammate he was, what type of pitcher he was. We'd obviously scouted him extensively in the division. He's been there forever. We've watched him so many times. So all those things seem to check off the boxes for us, and he really was an ideal guy for us to go after. And again, just like in the Kimbrel situation, we're kind of fortunate that he's here.
Yeah, and I mean, if there were any concerns about David Price, at least from the outside of the organization and people in this town, it was that his postseason numbers are not great. But I kept telling people, don't Google David Price postseason stats. You got to actually watch him pitch. And when you go back to, let's go to this past ALCS, I think the two starts that he had, games 2 and 6, I think, he pitched very well. A couple hiccups, I think, in game 2. Gibbons, took him out a little too late, in my opinion. And then in game 6, he let up 2 early solo home runs, settled down nicely, and ended up dealing in that game. So you can't necessarily look at the numbers. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it clearly didn't, those postseason numbers didn't scare you guys away. And I guess my question is, why is that? And again, not that I'm saying you should have been scared away, Mike, but you must have discussed this internally before opening up the checkbook. How were you able to get past that as you discussed something like that?
Very, very quickly. Very quickly. You don't, it's very difficult to put a lot of stock in postseason numbers. I got to be honest with you. It's a short run of games. It's an environment that you pitch very rarely in. We have to build a club for 162 plus the postseason. So there's it's just as important to be able to get there as to run through the playoffs. It's not just about one starting pitcher. Yeah, sure, a starting pitcher like Bumgarner puts you on his back and he carry you through. Sure, that can happen. David Price is that same talent level and can do the same thing. It hasn't happened yet. We believe it's going to happen. The fact that it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean anything. You get into one game in a game of baseball and the ball bounces off the bag the wrong way. You make one bad pitch that gets popped over the fence and you don't score any runs and you lose that game. Those things are all going to happen in the game of baseball in one game. And to pin that all on a specific starting pitcher, I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's the fair way to evaluate things. I think more impressive to us, I think, is the fact that this guy's walked into this ballpark as a left-handed pitcher facing dominant right-handed lineups and had very good success. And against the Red Sox, against the Blue Jays, and then for the Blue Jays, and against the Orioles, the number 1 home run park in baseball last year, this guy's walked into these stadiums time after time after time and been successful. And to me, that's something you're going to hang your hat on for 162 plus, and hopefully we do a good enough job of building a team around him when we get into the playoffs that support him, that score runs for him, that play defense for him, that postseason record is going to change.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, you even mentioned it a few minutes ago. You got to get back to the playoffs first, right? If I'm in your shoes and that conversation comes up about postseason stats, I'd be sitting there going, well, wait a minute. We have to get to the postseason before we can worry about somebody's postseason stats, right?
Right.
So
yeah, we're not arguing luxuries over here. It's not that easy in the game of baseball to make the postseason. There's very few teams that make the postseason, and if you get into the 4 or 5 hole, you're in trouble because you got one game to to figure out if you're any good, and that doesn't work in the game of baseball in a lot of cases for just the way it's played. And it certainly makes for an exciting postseason from the game's perspective. I get it, but if you're one of those teams in that game, that's a tough. You want to win your division. You want to be able to say that you're at least going to have a series where a pitcher, one of your best players, your best pitcher, is going to have a chance to pitch twice. Maybe you have a chance if you clinch the division early enough that you can set up for the playoffs, which is a key thing. All those things have to happen, and in order for those things to happen, you have to be good over 162, and that's what we're building this club for.
Speaking with Mike Hazen, Boston Red Sox Senior Vice President and General Manager. He joins me over the phone today on the Danny Picard Show. We're talking about getting back to the postseason. When, if you can get back to the postseason, Mike, which I expect you to do with some of the moves that you've made, I go back to this past postseason. I guess I look at a blueprint around the league, and it's not just one top dog starter, in your rotation. It's two. I mean, some of the final teams that were still kicking around, some of them had three. You look at the Mets. You could even make the argument they had four. So you need more than one. And I guess the way I look at this offseason for you guys is, okay, it's, you did your job in the bullpen with Miller. You got David Price for your rotation. But I guess I look at it and think, could they add another one? And I guess now I ask, is there any interest, or was there any interest in maybe trying to trade for a top-of-the-rotation pitcher in some type of deal this winter?
Yeah, we examined all those things. The cost of starting pitching was extremely high on the trade market going into the offseason. Again, sort of focusing us on David Price as a more viable alternative for what we needed to get done. I would argue with you a little bit that, yeah, we can cherry-pick the Mets and look at the way they're built, and they're certainly built. Everybody would love to have the starting rotation the Mets have, but I'll contrast that with the Royals. Like, you can't make that argument with the Royals, and the Royals have been the best team in baseball over the last 2 years. I mean, they've been to the World Series once, and they won it a second time, and they weren't built that way. Starting pitching wasn't their strong suit necessarily going through an entire season. They built it differently.
Mike, they went out and got Cueto, though, and to add, I know Ventura had a tough first half, but he bounced back in the second half, and Ventura, Cueto, it's a pretty good 1-2 punch.
Yeah, I would argue that David Price and Clay Buchholz, when he's healthy, could match the performances of those two guys. My point being is, you're right. Like, that would be one way to build a club. Another way to build a club, more like what Kansas City did, was elite defense, good contact, and a tremendous bullpen. And certainly, their starting pitchers throw strikes and they battle, and it's a solid starting pitching group. But I wouldn't compare those two clubs necessarily in that way. And so my point being is, like, there are other ways to do this. And, one of the things that you got to do in the American League East is score runs. We play in a lot of very offensive inflated ballparks, Baltimore, Toronto, Boston, and the Yankees, and especially to right field. You got to score a lot of runs in this division. And so you need to have offense as well. So, and look, you got to allocate some of your talent and your resources to all those things. And I think, again, why our young position player group hopefully will be so valuable to us is because as those guys grow, we hopefully will be able to bring back the caliber of offense we had in 2013 and prior to, that can help sustain your starting pitching and your bullpen through the course of a season.
I'm not going to sit here and try to talk you into trading for a starting pitcher, but while I have you on the phone, Mike, I have to ask you about and get into your head as a GM as to what you thought of the Shelby Miller trade, just bringing it back to trade value, market value of potential trades, because I'm wondering if that trade pissed other GMs off, because Arizona gave up a whole heck of a lot. What they give up? Their number 1 overall pick from last year to go along with 2 other top prospects, and they get Shelby Miller. I like Shelby Miller. I like what Arizona's doing, signing Greinke, getting Miller, but, they gave up a lot for Miller. That must have raised the asking price for some other clubs, like a Miami or an Oakland or a White Sox or whoever it may be. Did you look at that move as a GM and go, whoa, wait a minute, that's an awful lot. That's going to make it even more difficult for us to make a trade for a starting pitcher.
No, when we looked at the market for starting pitchers, the market was already high. It wasn't any, we look at that trade, we look at other trades. Those, it's two teams, consummating a trade between them. Those things change because we have different players than the Diamondbacks have, than the Braves have, and to offer and to trade for, the club we're going after. And I just don't think those things all have a huge impact. Everyone said we overpaid for Kimbrel. people said that Houston overpaid for Giles. Like maybe, the trade environment right now, that pitching is extremely valuable, and as such, it's extremely expensive. And you see that on the free agent side of things, and you see that on the trade side of things. And, that's something you have to deal with. You can't, we could sit out, we could wait and do nothing, but we chose not to on the free agent side of things. And, you're always going to explore trades, and you're always going to continue to ask, and you're going to try to pursue things that you think are going to help make your club better. But if they're not there, they're not there. And, Arizona felt like they had to go get Shelby Miller, and good for them. And Atlanta is obviously operating, doing other things, and I think they did pretty well in that trade. So, we'll see what happens at the end of next season, who actually, came out on top there or for seasons to come. But, that doesn't really have an impact on us.
All right, so it's January 5th. Safe to say you guys are done making major moves this offseason. I mean, you can't rule out all moves, but major moves like the ones you've made, is it safe to say you're done making those type of deals?
Yeah, I think that's safe to say. Like you said, I wouldn't rule out making no moves, certainly. We have a long way to go, and you don't know what's going to get thrown in your lap, especially from a trade standpoint. I think that's the one where there are going to be things that still have to break. There's a lot of free agents still left out on the market. Those things have to settle. There are teams that still have holes to fill. There are teams that still have needs to fill. And, we have a lot of good young players that teams have asked about and will continue to ask about. And who knows what, depending on what other clubs want to do as we get closer to spring training, and maybe, other teams, if they get anxious for whatever reason to want to have to make a deal or need to make a deal, then, things could still happen here. We're certainly staying in contact with everybody and staying in the loop on all things as it relates to those players. It's hard to predict right now, but I think a lot of the major lifting has already been done.
And Hanley Ramirez, you're still expecting him to be a starting first baseman on opening day, right? Now, that has not changed.
Correct. That has not changed.
Any updates on his workouts? I know you guys have asked him to lose a little bit of weight, maybe 15 pounds. I think I read. I mean, any updates on him? Do you keep in touch with Hanley? What's going on with him right now?
Yeah, I actually had the pleasure of having dinner with Hanley and Pedro down in the DR right before Christmas. That was an interesting evening, a good dinner. He looked good. I know he's working hard. I know. I think that one of the biggest themes for a lot of guys this year is with David making the announcement. I think a lot of guys really want to play for David, and I think they really want to send David out on top. I think it's important to a lot of those guys that David was a mentor for, or guys looked up to, and I think that's motivating for a lot of those guys. That hey, look, everybody was here last year. They know nobody likes to, not to mention in this town alone, but finishing in last place for these guys with the amount of pride they have. I think you're going to see differences coming into spring training.
And David Ortiz, I mean, he doesn't have to go around and tell people that, we all know this is his farewell tour. It's sort of a given around the clubhouse, right? Guys looking around going, we got to do this for Big Papi. I mean, you think is that going to be the theme we know it's going to be the theme from the organization and from other teams when David Ortiz goes into their ballparks, sending them off with the farewell tour. But I mean, inside the clubhouse with other players, is that going to be a theme for everybody on this team to let's send David Ortiz out on top?
I mean, it's baseball. Themes kind of wear thin after a couple of days or a few losses or a bad road trip. And so it's hard to carry a theme for the entire year. But yeah, that certainly some undercurrent of that is going to be in our clubhouse. It has to be. This guy has made such a mark on this city. You look what he's done for the city, for the team. I mean, the World Series titles, the performances in the postseason, and that's something that guys pay attention to. It's something that garners a tremendous amount of respect inside and outside of the clubhouse. And I think you'd have to have no heart or no feelings at all not to see that and want to do something to contribute to sort of David going out on top with one last run.
Hey, you might not want to tell people you're going out to dinner with Hanley Ramirez because, you're trying to get him to lose weight. If he doesn't, we're going to be putting on you, Mike. You're taking Hanley Ramirez.
I didn't tell you what he had for dinner. The guy had fish
right.
for dinner. I think that he was eating pretty healthy.
I know. I'm just kidding with you on that one. But when I think of Hanley going to first, I have to ask you, because I always bring this up on the radio and on this podcast, and it's was there ever any discussion about, all right, you need to get Hanley in the infield? Was there ever discussion about putting him on the other side, getting him back to the side that he's normal? And obviously not shortstop because you got Xander Bogaerts,
right.
But maybe tease the idea of putting him at third and moving Pablo over to first. Was there ever the discussion on that?
We talked about some of those things. I think when you start moving multiple players, multiple positions, you end up creating more uncertainty, I think, or you in terms of asking multiple guys to change positions. I think, I think Pablo could play first base. I think Hanley could probably play third. But I think we felt like this was the best path for us in order to make, keep as many constants in that infield as possible. And we believe that Hanley's going to be a good first baseman. I mean, the guy was a good shortstop. He obviously got bigger and stronger as he's gotten a little bit older, and he's going to have to work on that. And I think that's why you saw some of the weight comments in terms of being a little bit more athletic when he moves in and around first base, because as we see, that's a challenging position. He's got good hands. It's not going to rely on him to make a ton of throws. He can move. If you box a ball at first base, it hits you on the chest. You have plenty more time to recover and make a play. It's a very challenging position from a technique standpoint, obviously, and there's a lot of work that's got to go into it. But you do have a little bit more from a timing standpoint in terms of the pitcher covering first base, or if you don't field the ball cleanly, you can recover a lot better than you can on the other side of the field. But more than anything else, we think that the guy had the ability to play shortstop in the big leagues for a long time. He had good hands, he had good instincts over there, and we're shifting him a little bit on the infield.
And finally, I got to ask you about Christian Vasquez. Where are we with him with his return? Are we looking at him being 100% soon? And I guess in a perfect world, I mean, is Vasquez, is he your guy behind the plate most of the season, or even on opening day? I mean, he's the guy that I'm most excited to see here moving forward. And I know you guys think very highly of him. Where are we with Christian Vasquez? Any update on him?
Yeah, so Vasquez playing in the Puerto Rican Winter League right now. He's wrapping up. He's been playing since November. So he's gotten over 100 at-bats under his belt, mostly all DHing, I should say. We weren't going to allow him to catch until he comes into spring training. So he's going to come to Fort Myers in January, continue his rehab from a throwing standpoint. He's been throwing. He's going to continue that leading up to spring training, where he'll catch for the first time. Not going to put any markers on that one. He's coming back from Tommy John surgery, where everything's been good. He's been swinging the bat well. He's had no issues. But we'll see what happens when we get into spring training and he gets behind the plate again, because it's been a while since he's done that. We're going to have to get him back up to speed. But, as you said, I mean, this guy's such a talent. He's such weapons back there. His ability to receive, his ability to throw. He's so quick. He's certainly a difference maker back there.
All right, Mike, thanks a lot for joining me today. Best of luck in 2016, and we hope to get you on the show again at some point during the season.
All right, Danny, anytime.